I'm Danielle Hewitt. I'm Thesis Module Coordinator for the Landscape Architecture programme here at the Bartlett School of Architecture, and this is a role that I share with my colleague Richard Beckett. The Landscape Architecture thesis is a major piece of individual research, and this is undertaken by all students on the programme. Each student is appointed a supervisor drawn from academia or professional practice who is able to support a student in their evolving research. The thesis is an opportunity for students to further develop particular concerns or questions that may have arisen in their design studio work, and to look at these from new perspectives or using new methodologies. The thesis is also an opportunity for a student to step aside from their design work and to develop questions and research that sits adjacent to or is complementary to what they have been exploring in their studio. Students come to the programme from a really diverse set of backgrounds and experiences, and this brings a real richness to the research and the diversity of approaches and topics that are pursued through the thesis. The preparation for the thesis occurs throughout the programme in modules in history and theory, technology, ecology, as well as the design studios. And the thesis, along with the design portfolio, is a major culmination of the work of the programme. The work is critical, rigorous, and it often employs innovative methodologies. We hope that you enjoy hearing these extracts that we are sharing here.
Hello, my name is Georgina Standwick, and I came to the Bartlett Landscape Architecture programme with a background in architecture and a professional background in landscape, with a passion for ecological restoration and an interest in how landscapes transform under the pressures of climate change. My thesis is titled Drawn by the Tide Towards a Felt Cartography of Ephemeral Venice. Why this thesis? Venice is a city suspended between land and water, a place where edges shift daily with the tide, yet most of the ways we map it, plans and surveys and diagrams, suggest a fixed and stable ground. My project asks, how can we map a disappearing landscape without pretending it is static? I propose what I call a felt cartography, a way of mapping that is less about control and capture, and more about presence and care and witnessing. My methods. To do this, I worked with two main methods. First, iterative drawing in the field. I returned to the same tidal edges and sketched repeatedly, letting lines accumulate as a record of what has shifted and eroded and disappeared. Secondly, I worked with salt as a collaborator. I laid salt and water onto paper and allowed crystallization, staining, and collapse to inscribe themselves, working with the lagoon as an author. These salt drawings register wind, humidity, evaporation, and tide, producing traces that are not just illustrations but performances of the lagoon's processes. These methods deliberately let material agency, the tide, the salt, the air, take part in the drawing. Read an extract from Chapter 4. 4.1. Salt, Erosion, Fragility, a Material Narrative. Salt is intrinsically unstable. It dissolves, recrystallizes, stains, corrodes, and disappears. These characteristics make it an ideal metaphor and medium for mapping threatened dynamic landscapes. Whereas paper and ink strive for fixity, salt resists permanence. It responds to humidity, temperature, and time, leaking and failing. In doing so, it tells the true story of a landscape in flux. Salt drawings shift, mapping from static description to a performative enactment, where each piece becomes both document and event shaped by climate and material chance. Salt is not applied as a mere texture, but invited as an interlocutor. Salt drawings do not just depict the lagoon, they behave like it. They buckle, warp, and leave residues. Some disintegrate entirely, leaving only crusts of faint tide lines. These outcomes, often dismissed as errors in traditional cartography, are embraced here as authentic inscriptions of environmental conditions. This approach refuses the illusion of cartographic control and demands that maps reckon with instability rather than erase it. This challenges the conventional standard that maps should strive for accuracy and permanence. Instead, my method contends that environmental stability and material decay are essential elements of knowledge about the lagoon's transformation. The inclusion of errors as valuable information shifts the epistemological framework of mapping from control to care. Salt's erosive action mirrors ecological processes in the lagoon, such as tidal currents wearing down stone and salinity, bleaching timber. While human attempts to control these edges and rely on rigid infrastructure, salt offers an alternative logic of slow undoing. Working with salt invites mapping as witnessing rather than preservation, a crucial stance in an era of climate precarity. The question shifts from how to prevent dissolution to how to stay with it. Salt drawings transform disappearance into visible knowledge, insisting that vanishing phenomena leave traces worthy of attention. These ideas underlie the experiments detailed here and inform the toolkit I propose in Chapter 5. Estrida Neymanis writes, "To be a body of water is to leak, to flow, to carry histories." Salt drawings enact this ethos, carrying traces of the lagoon's watery transformations. These ideas connect to the iterative drawing methods in Chapter 3 and anticipate the poetic strategies in Chapter 5. Figure 47 embodies a conversation between salt and water and pigment, where each element acts with its own agency. Rather than imposing order, the drawing listens and responds, aligning with Estrida Neymani's notion of permeability and relationality. It stands as evidence of mapping as a shared act, where the mapmaker and materials collaborate to trace fleeting atmospheric conditions and the memory of place. The highlighted area strikingly echoes tidal and sedimentary processes in the lagoon, resembling salt deposits forming along tidal edges, while the darker, granular surface suggests silt and fine sediment settling as water recedes. This boundary between light and dark evokes shifting shorelines, capturing how salt drawings can materially mimic the very patterns of erosion and deposition and fluid motion that they aim to map. It reinforces this thesis's argument that mapping emerges through material dialogue, where even microscopic details carry traces of environmental rhythms. The toolkit. This thesis concludes with a poetic toolkit for relational mapping. It sets out 4 simple steps. Return. Revisit the same sites across seasons to witness ongoing change. Attune. Pay attention to conditions like wind, tide, and humidity, recording them alongside drawings. Co-author. Work with responsive media such as salt, water, or clay, allowing the site to mark itself. And translate. Bring these traces into design, for example, aligning soft edges or planting schemes with flows made visible in the drawings. This approach moves mapping from being extractive to being relational and opens a path towards restoration design that is sensitive and site-specific. Looking ahead, I intend to bring this into practice as restoration-led, community-engaged design. By using iterative drawing and material tests, I want to develop soft infrastructures and co-creative methods that help communities design with water rather than against it. To conclude, to map otherwise is to care otherwise. Drawn by the Tide argues that cartography can hold fragility, record disappearance, and invite us to design with change instead of resisting it. Thank you.
Hi, my name is Nazal. I'm a Year 2 Landscape Architecture student at the Bartlett UCL. My journey to this course began in the Maldives, where I grew up surrounded by reefs, lagoons, and atolls. A place where the ocean is never just a scenery, but a livelihood, protection, and culture. This relationship with water has reshaped how I see landscape, not as something fixed or solid, but as something fluid, living, and always in motion. My thesis is titled Reef and Ruins: Cultural Narratives in Regenerated Coral Landscapes. Looking ahead, I hope to continue working on reef regeneration projects, bridging ecology, craft, and design, using landscape architecture to create strategies that are not only climate resilient but culturally rooted. Landscapes are created out of people's understanding and engagement with the world around them. They are always in process, shaped, reshaped, and shaped again. Being of the moment, they are always temporal. They are not a record, but a recording. And that recording is much more than a reflection of human action. It is creative of us. I begin here with Barbara Bender's words, because my work listens to a landscape that is not ground at all. It listens to the reef. Landscape architecture traditionally has always mostly looked towards hills, valleys, rivers, ridges, mountains, and meadows. But beneath the water's surface, there's another landscape, one that is rhythmic, shifting, and breathing. In the Maldives, where the horizon is a thin line between ocean and sky, the reef is our first ground. It is our breakwater, our nursery, our archive. But the ground is fragile. Rising seas push higher each year, bleaching these corals and reefs, basically spread like pale fire across the reef. What was once a living wall of color, a ringing of fish and foam, is increasingly a silent architecture of bone white stone. This thesis reframes Maldivian reefs as living archives, terrains where ecological processes, ritual practice, and collective memory converge. Now, conventional restoration often deploys these generic metal frames of concrete or concrete modules, efficient, but it's culturally mute. So here, I propose a different approach. Reef substrate inscribed with Thana script or the Moldavian letters, carved with spiraling motifs of Lielajahung or the lacquerwork, or textured like kunamats or mat weaving, and filigreed like the silver jewelry of island artisans of Rimbudu. Now, in the Maldives, atolls and the islands, some of them are well known for their art and crafts. And how do I bring in the artisans and the culture and the art into these regenerative practices is the first question I asked while working on this thesis. So, the making is as important as the outcome, and these patterns become surfaces for coral settlement, embedding the Maldivian artistry into the reef's living fabric. Community carving workshops or inter-atoll knowledge exchanges, ceremonial deployments where these modules are lowered into the lagoons as offerings or transform restoration into ritual, and each piece then becomes both an artifact and a habitat. Palimpsest, where coral grows over carving, where time and culture and ecology layer over one another. And so this is not a restoration as return, but restoration as renewal. It is resilience as something lived, not just measured. So this project asks, how can we design for coral and culture together? How can reef regeneration also regenerate Maldivian identity? How can we design not just against the rising sea, but with it? In the end, this work is both speculative and grounded, imagining a reef that is both a garden and a gallery, both archive and future. And as Bender reminds us, landscape is never a fixed record, it is a recording, and we too are a part of its sound.
Hello, my name is Alisa Lam and I'm a student on the MLA Landscape Architecture program at the Bartlett. I'd like to begin by thanking my supervisor, Dr. Adam Walsh, for the guidance and support. My thesis is titled Indigenous Ecologies of Consciousness, the Sacred Wixarika Medicine to Global Commodity in the Psychedelic Renaissance. I'd like to share the following excerpt of my thesis. This thesis has shown how peyote sits at a crossroads, caught between his life as a sacred being embedded in Wixarika ceremonial wells and his life as a global commodity circulating in the Psychedelic Renaissance. Across chapters, it became clear that commodification is not a neutral process. We treat economies, wellness narratives, and even psychedelic science reduce peyote to its alkaloid essence and marketable symbolism. This detachment displaces the cactus from the sacred desert, shaping it into a therapeutic product by eroding the ceremonial obligations that keep both land, culture, and balance. At the same time, tourism and retreat economies bring new ecological pressure to the recruiter, depleting wild peyote population and disrupting pilgrimage routes that are central to Wixarika cosmology. Yet the findings also complicate any simple binary effect on food and appropriation.
in Rurarica are not merely act to the point, they respond. Projects like the Reef Preservation Project and Let's Talk About Ecology show how resistance can take the form of regeneration. Landback efforts reclaim fragments of sacred territory, restoring access for pilgrims and creating space for ceremony. Knowledge projects renew the teachings of Godwin's harvesting, ensuring that peyote remains king rather than resource. These initiatives review sovereignty not as an abstract legal concept, but as a living practice, carried out through planting, prayer, education, and care for practice that sustains their world. However, these responses are not without tension. To buy back land required entering the same property markets that enabled dispossession. Greenhouse cultivation of peyote replenishes populations, but risks altering sacred relationship forged through pilgrimage to the wild desert. Small-scale factories stand in the shadow of broader structural forces. Mining, agribusinesses, and global psychedelic demand remain intact. These contradictions highlight that decolonization is a slow and uneven process, requiring uncomfortable compromises while pushing toward futures beyond secular frameworks. Significance of these findings extend beyond Rurarica territory. They come to question psychedelic renaissance itself, asking whether promises of healing and connection can ever be fulfilled by reproducing colonial patterns of extraction. They remind us that sacred plants cannot be understood apart from landscapes and ways that give them meaning. For outsiders, the challenges to support indigenous sovereignty not as charity possess a responsibility. To step back from consumptionism, listen to those who have tended these relationships for generations. Looking ahead, peyote story gestures towards broader truth. Colonization does not stop the returning land, but works hand in hand with reviving the relation of world that land holds. It is a practice of world building rather than preservation, grounded in reciprocity and responsibility. The Rurarica shows that even in the face of extraction, there are ways to re-anchor medicine in ceremony, to root healing in place, and to keep alive the bonds that make both culture and ecology flourish. In this sense, peyote remains what it has always been, not a commodity, but a guide putting us back to the responsibilities of relation. My biggest takeaway from this research is the importance of being open to different ways of knowing. Too often we describe other worlds in terms that we already know, like translating them to our own language, but if we really want to learn, sometimes we need to set aside our own world first. I was reminded of this while reading The Glacial Expectations, where artists elaborate lines and writes. Structures we are all caught up in pacify us to the extent of making us numb, and we don't see the world that is around us. We have to unlearn our habit, assumptions, knowledge, and disconstruct our gaze. Unlearning is a way to allow our senses to recalibrate and almost do a little fact check. This thesis has been for me a practice of unlearning, to recognize peyote not only as a substance or symbol, but as a being, a relation, and a guide in the wider world of reciprocity. It has taught me that research is not only about accumulating knowledge, but calibrating perception, learning to see differently.
I did some case studies worldwide to extract strategies. For example, London's Olympic Park demonstrates stormwater resilience through SUDS. Cape Town's Greenpoint Stadium links biodiversity and education. The Nagyedo Stadium in Hungary integrates into a forest. The StubHub Center in California uses urban farming, and the Oval in London applies vertical greening. Each case provides tactics like green roofs, biospheres, or community gardens that can be adapted to stadium context. My chosen site, Wembley Park, shows both progress but limitations. Tree planting, rain gardens, and new parks soften the infrastructure, but these are mostly ornamental. The stadium's vast, impermeable footprint, fragmented ecology, and underused liminal spaces remain unresolved. To address this, I propose modular and scalable retrofitting solutions, a vertical greening and bioretentive system, community-driven habitats, adaptive stormwater landscapes, and ecological corridors linking into the wider city. These strategies allow stadiums to transform hard, isolated icons into multifunctional living systems. To conclude, as we move towards the Symbiocene, a future built on coexistence between humans and nature, stadium landscapes present a powerful yet overlooked opportunity. These vast, often underused sites can be retrofitted into ecological hubs that support biodiversity, climate resilience, and community life. This shift is not only ecological but cultural, from seeing stadiums purely as sites of spectacle to embedding them in everyday fabric of the city. By linking them into the wider green infrastructure, they can act as ecological nodes. To achieve this, we need a dual scale approach, activating public space at the micro level while also strengthening ecological connectivity at the city scale. Ultimately, for stadiums to become true catalysts for this Symbiocene, they must be accessible, multifunctional, and integrated into the daily urban life. Thank you.